After the end of World War II, a warship was anchored in a port, not to start the war but to send the brave soldiers to their families. One of them is Sergeant Paul, is a simple and kind man. Paul is also an orphan, and all he wants is to build a family with his wife. After 4 years of service, Paul finally got to see his wife, Betty. It was their wedding day, the last time they saw each other. Together with him are other soldiers who have survived the bloody battle in the Pacific. Meanwhile, at the dock, hundreds of wives and ladies gathered to welcome their significant others. Despite the heavy rains pouring down, the women eagerly await their husbands to get down from the ship. The lively sound of trumpets made the surroundings more alive, with couples hugging and kissing. Paul couldn't hide his smile as he was about to get near the crowd of women. They may have similar uniforms to his co-soldiers, but Paul is highly confident that Betty will recognize him. The soldier looked around the vicinity smiling, trying to spot his wife's location. However, he was not able to see Betty. There, he decided to stay at his location so it would be easier for his wife to look for him. Time passed by, but no woman approached Paul. He felt dismayed as he looked at other soldiers who joyfully walked away with their wives. Paul was left alone at the port, and no one picked him up. Lonely, Paul walked to the streets and headed to his apartment. He grabbed a locket where a picture of Betty was placed and his room keys. Paul opened the door. There he saw his wife wearing pale green lingerie. Betty was so shocked to see Paul. She rushed towards him, and Paul hugged her. Betty is much younger than Paul. Paul is so sweet that he writes to her almost every day. He asked Betty why she had no idea of him returning home. Betty rattled and reasoned that she stopped reading the letters because she couldn't bear the war descriptions that Paul included in his letter. Paul looks dismayed but remains calm because he loves his wife so much. Betty, on the other hand, was nervous about Paul's reaction, so she proceeded to tell him that she kept all of the letters he sent. True enough, a wooden trunk Betty showed is full of letters, but all unopened. Paul looked hurt but continued to listen to Betty's explanation. He also forgives her because he misses her so much. The two sat in the living area. Paul opened up about dreaming of a family together with Betty. He wrote it all in the letters, but Betty didn't read them. On the other hand, Betty wants Paul to sell chocolates again. But Paul doesn't want to go back to that job. Betty insisted because she wanted him to make more money to buy more things. Betty only wants money and to buy everything she wants. At her young age, she's still not ready to settle down with Paul. Regardless of their opposite mindset, the two had romantic moments. Paul misses her so much and made love to her that night. The next day, Paul was all in uniform while Betty was still sleeping. Paul kissed her, bidding his goodbye before he left. Paul is going to Sacramento to search for work. He also brought the box of chocolate to sell there in the meantime. Paul hopped on a train. There, an elegant lady caught his attention. She looked bothered and had difficulty putting her suitcase in the baggage compartment that she hardly reached. Her suitcase fell. A picture frame of her and her dad was broken, and all her things were scattered on the train's floor. Paul immediately approached the lady and helped her. The train went full speed, and the two lost their balance. Paul was on top of the lady. As the lady stands, Paul makes sure she's okay. A little while, the lady puked, not on the floor but on Paul's uniform. Kind Paul never went upset and just washed his clothes at the sink. As he headed out of the comfort room to his seat, everyone stared at him because he smelled awful. His seat was just in front of the lady who vomited. Paul falls asleep on his chair. There, he dreamed of the war. It was so chaotic and painful as he saw his co-soldiers brutally eliminated. Paul is still traumatized by the war. A little while, he wakes up from the nightmare. Paul looked back to the lady's seat and noticed she was already gone. Paul finally arrived at his station in San Francisco. He got off the train and rushed to get to the bus heading to Sacramento. The lady driver saw him running and let him in the vehicle. As he was looking for his seat, he noticed a familiar woman. It was the beautiful lady at the train station. She also saw Paul and greeted him. She is Victoria Aragon, an elegant lady taking her master's degree in the city. Victoria is heading home to Napa Valley, where their family's vineyard is also located. Halfway to Napa Valley, two perverts went on the bus, also carrying a suitcase. One sat behind Victoria while the other was just beside her. They were bothering the lady. Victoria talked rudely for them to stop. However, the perverts start bothering Victoria. Paul interrupted, and the two men stopped touching the lady. The pervert looked at Paul and initiated to punch him. As a soldier, Paul's reflexes enabled him to avoid perverts' strong punches. Without hesitation, Paul stood up and fought back. He effortlessly defeated them. The bus stopped where Paul and the perverts were kicked out. Paul was not familiar with the place but couldn't do anything. He looked at Victoria in the bus window, looking concerned at him. Paul walked in silence in the middle of the woods, all alone. After hours of walking, Paul noticed a sleeping lady sitting in the middle of the road. It was Victoria. Paul approached her. Victoria was awakened and apologized to Paul for all of the problems she had caused. Paul, on the other hand, was just smiling and wholeheartedly accepted Victoria's apologies. The two talked for a while until Victoria shed tears. Paul was shocked because he was clueless about what was making her sob. Paul feels so concerned for the lady. There, Victoria admitted that she was pregnant. She also broke up with the professor, who is the father of her child. Her daddy, Alberto, will surely get mad once he knows her condition. This is the reason why Victoria looked bothered even at the train station. Paul comforted the lady by telling her to look on the positive side of her worries. Victoria continued crying, knowing her father's personality. Alberto Aragon is very traditional. If Victoria comes home pregnant without a husband, her father will surely put her to eternal sleep. Mr. Aragon means what he says, and Victoria is sure about that. Paul looked concerned and thought of a way to help her. He offered to stay a night at Victoria's home to pretend as her husband. He also shared with Victoria that he has a wife, and he constantly writes letters to her while in the war. After a tiring walk, the two finally arrived at the vineyard that Victoria's family owns. A beautiful cloud Victoria calls Las Nubes was above Aragon's mansion, and the vast field of grapes. Before they went near the place, Paul grabbed a ring from the chocolate he was selling and placed it on Victoria's finger. He also wore a similar ring to look like they were engaged. A little while, someone was firing a rifle at them. Paul escorted Victoria to get down. A man in boots was walking and getting near. It was Victoria's dad, Alberto. There, Victoria introduced Paul as her husband. Alberto was so angry that he shot again. He called his wife, Marie. Alberto was so mad that Victoria got married without his knowledge. He was also upset after he knew that Paul only sells chocolate for a living. Regardless, Victoria's grandparents accepted Paul. Don Pedro Aragon even loved the chocolates he was selling. At Aragon's mansion's kitchen, helpers congratulated Victoria. Her mom and grandma also advised Victoria to follow her heart in what she truly loves to do. They were all against Alberto being so traditional and short-tempered. Alberto was against Victoria going to the city to study because, for him, women are meant to stay at home. Apart from that, Alberto wants his daughter to marry a Mexican guy Victoria never even met. Victoria's mother hugged her and told Victoria that everything would be fine. At the dining table, the religious family prayed before eating. Paul also joined the extravagant dinner prepared at the mansion. There, Victoria's family asked how the two met. They also interrogated Paul on his family background. When Paul shared that he's an orphan, Alberto reacted with disgust. He immediately boasted to Paul their bloodline has roots in one of the finest families in Mexico. Alberto was not contented, and he told Paul that he was a man with no past and future because he was an orphan. Paul never talked back and remained composed despite the hurtful words he heard. He continued eating in silence. Meanwhile, Victoria told her dad that Paul is a very loving man who wants a family and a great job. Her father responded and told Victoria if selling chocolates was the great job she was referring to. The silence was heard after. Paul was so hurt and humiliated. For the second time, he never talked back nor acted wildly. Instead, he excused himself and thanked all of them for dinner. Victoria was teary-eyed, looking at Paul, hurt. She stood up from the table and followed Paul. Paul went to gasp some air outside after being insulted. Victoria went near to him and apologized for the incident. Paul just looked above and reminisced the day when he was a kid making a wish to every star he saw at night, to have a family. He felt dismayed that Victoria's family was opposed to the family he dreamed of. Despite that, Paul told Victoria that he understood his father. He may have also acted the same way if he finds out that his only daughter was married to a strange man, and he's the last to know. Paul looked at his watch, only 8 hours left for the day. He's about to leave the next day to continue searching for a job in Sacramento. It's now time to sleep. Marie, Victoria's mom, prepared an expensive bed and pillows for the couple in the master's bedroom. Victoria said that they could stay in a smaller bed instead, but Marie insisted and jokingly said they needed it to maneuver on their first night at the mansion. Paul smiled shyly. Before leaving the room, Marie told the couple to love each other always and left a red rose on their bed as a tradition. Meanwhile, in the separate room, Alberto was so mad because he would be staying on a smaller bed. Victoria and Paul used the master's bedroom. Marie calmed him down and requested him to wish goodnight to their daughter before sleeping. In the master's bedroom, Paul and Victoria are wearing nighties. However, Victoria will sleep in bed, and Paul will be on the floor. While Victoria was combing her hair, she asked Paul out of nowhere if he loved selling chocolates. Paul responded that he doesn't but is willing to do it because he's already married. He also told Victoria that she'd understand it along the way once she had a husband. Victoria was silent. Paul looked at her and apologized as he thought that Victoria felt insulted. Victoria, on the other hand, denies that she's hurt. Instead, she expresses her gratitude for everything that Paul did to her from the train until the time that she reached home. Victoria requested Paul to turn around since she was braless. Paul turned, and Victoria removed her robe. Paul still feels that Victoria is hopeless in her life. He motivates her by telling her that there is still someone who is meant for her. Victoria disagrees as she sees that a man can't marry a pregnant woman like her. Paul replied that he'd marry a woman even if she's not carrying his child, if he loves her very much. Lights were turned off, and the two were about to sleep. Suddenly, Alberto knocks on the door. Victoria rattled and told Paul to come with her in bed, so her father won't suspect they were not couples. Paul immediately hopped on the bed and hugged Victoria in his arms. The door opened, and Alberto came in. The two were so nervous about what will Alberto say. He just wished goodnight to them and left the room. Before leaving, Alberto noticed a blanket on the floor, the blanket that Paul will use to sleep. However, he seemed not to mind it and went outside. Paul and Victoria finally breathe after. Victoria told Paul that the room had no lock. Because of that, Paul decided to just sleep with Victoria in bed in case her father returns. Paul's thoughtful gestures touched Victoria. She looked at him and went nearer. Victoria wants to kiss him. However, Paul was kind and loyal to his wife, so he avoided being tempted to kiss another woman. Paul moved to the other side of the bed and slept. In the middle of the night, Paul had a nightmare. He screamed Victoria's name. Paul breathes hard, trying to gasp some air. Victoria was awakened and told Paul everything was all right, and it was all a dream. Bell rang at the farm, indicating that there was a problem. Frost is about to damage their grapes if no action is done. All of the farmers of the vineyard woke up and turned on the flames placed on a metal pipe for the temperature to rise. Alberto, as the heir and manager of Don Pedro's farm, instructed everyone to position their places. Victoria also ran to the field, looking concerned about the grapes' condition. Paul followed her. Paul asked Alberto if there was anything he could do to help. Alberto just shouted at him and belittled his capacity. Victoria pitied Paul and instructed him patiently on what to do if frost attacks the grapes. A white cloth shaped like a butterfly's wings is worn to counteract the frost. Victoria wears it and stands before Paul to teach him. Victoria and the farmers lift their arms up and down. The repetitive but slow manner of the flying-like lifting of arms equally distributes heat even to the roots of the vine. Paul tries it himself and eagerly follows Victoria's movement. Paul moved the wings passionately, wanting to prevent frost from worsening. In his effort to save the grapes, the soldier appears like he's one of the owners of the vineyard. Little did Paul know, Alberto was staring at him. His eyes couldn't believe how the man maneuvered the cloth wings like a pro. He seems to be a fast learner. Minutes passed, and heat from the flames of metal pipes installed at equal distances was already circulating the field. Paul returned to bed and prepared himself to leave at dawn. He prefers it so that fewer people are awake at that time. Fewer people, fewer questions, he told Victoria. Victoria was sitting on the bed, looking at Paul standing before her, bidding goodbye. No words can express how thankful Victoria is to Paul for saving her life from her traditional father, covering her unexpected pregnancy. Paul left the master's bedroom and headed out of the mansion when Don Pedro, Victoria's grandfather, stopped him. He grabbed Paul's bag and requested his men to hold it. Don Pedro also told Paul to bring his chocolates. The two went out of the mansion and headed for a walk around the vineyard. Don Pedro opened up his life as an older man and talked about random things. First, the man told Paul about his health. According to him, everyone, including his doctors, tells him to limit his intake of chocolates, salt, cigars, and brandy. Those restricted food are the ones he loves, and he complained like a baby to Paul. The older man also requested Paul to open up a box of chocolates so that he could get one. Don Pedro loved his chocolates. He was the one who offered to taste them when Alberto belittled his job. Don Pedro chose pink chocolate this time. It is wrapped in a ring, similar to the ring Paul gave to Victoria. The old man noticed it looked identical to her granddaughter's engagement ring and told Paul about it. Paul explained, and the old man believed him. Don Pedro finally takes a bite of the chocolate. He loved it much and acted like a kid restricted from consuming chocolate. He happily pats Paul's shoulder to compliment his delicious chocolates. The two continue to walk to the vineyard. There, Don Pedro shared with Paul that the family still took care of the vine roots that their ancestor, Pedro, planted in 1580. Don Pedro was named after him, the Pedro who started Aragon's plantation of high-quality grapes. The roots of the first vine are grown on a hill where las nubes, commonly known as clouds, were around it. Clouds around the slope look like a paradise, like an isolated location on earth where heaven is found. A fence guarded the first root, and a small chapel with a cross above sits next to it. Don Pedro gives so much importance to the vine as he refers to it as the root of their lives. All the grapes in the vineyard came from it. Without it, Aragon's grape production is nothing. After introducing Paul to the first roots, Don Pedro officially welcomed the soldier as part of the family. Paul was shocked and turned red. He was touched as the old man told him he was no longer an orphan because he had Aragon as his family. Don Pedro also told Paul to stay on the farm and help them manage their plantation. It is already harvesting time, the most important day that the Aragon looks forward to. However, Paul respectfully declined Don Pedro's offer and reasoned that he had other commitments. Don Pedro was saddened. He immediately thought of her dearest granddaughter. His father will make her suffer so much if Paul leaves. Alberto already thought that once Paul sets out of the mansion, he also abandons Victoria. Don Pedro was teary-eyed, knowing how strict and cruel his son was when raising his only daughter Victoria. Alberto will let Victoria carry all the responsibilities and burden of not having a husband beside her. Hearing that, Paul agreed to stay for another day, the most important day for the Aragon. Harvest time. The sun was already up when Victoria noticed that Paul didn't leave. Paul told Victoria that he values his commitment to the family. Family first, Paul told everyone. Alberto heard Paul, low-key impressed that he is still not leaving Victoria. A little while, another Pedro came. He is Victoria's brother, who was studying business at Stanford University. He went home to witness their family's tradition of harvesting grapes all together. Harvesting starts. Aragon's family leads in picking mature grapes from the vines. Paul is in charge of harvesting a line of fruits from the vines. The man finally mastered how to pick grapes. Parallel to him is Alberto, who picks grapes effortlessly. Paul observed him and copied his technique. Paul became faster in picking. Alberto noticed it, so he rapidly plucked grapes. The two competed on who's the fast picker. At the side of the field, Victoria and Aragon's family smiled as they looked at Paul and Alberto. Paul continued to pick grapes, and so is Alberto. The competition ended when Alberto brought the box of grapes in front of everyone. Paul also finished just a split second after him. The two men looked happy, and for the first time, Alberto genuinely smiled at Paul. Alberto toasts a wine to celebrate the fruitful harvest. Some of the harvested grapes were poured into a big and spacious wooden vat. The Aragons still practice a tradition of mashing the grapes manually through feet during harvest time. It was late in the afternoon when everyone gathered around the wooden vat. The men carried different instruments and played lively music. Everyone danced to the beat. Meanwhile, wives entered the spacious vat and crushed all the grapes through their feet. Victoria also joined them and stomped her feet to mash the grapes along with the music. Victoria looked so beautiful as the orange light of sunset lit her face. She danced gracefully that Paul seemed to fall in love with her. Music continues, and the wives enjoy. They held hands and played like kids there. The Aragons noticed that Paul locked eyes with the dancing Victoria. He also couldn't stop smiling while staring at her. There, they decided to carry him to let him inside the wooden vat. Paul giggled as he felt on his feet the grapes being crushed. At that moment, Paul thinks he's finally accepted into the family. Before him is Victoria, smiling. The two had a wonderful time. The women circled them as they played on the grapes. Paul went wild and bathed himself in the grape extract. All of their clothes are wet. Paul and Victoria were drawn at the moment and went near each other. They initiated a kiss. The women teased them by pulling them away. Paul and Victoria ran to their room to continue the interrupted kiss. They looked so much in love as they shared their first kiss. Paul passionately kissed Victoria and caressed her on the bed. A little later, Paul stopped. He went away from Victoria. Victoria, on the other hand, was left unsatisfied. She asked Paul why he stopped. There, Paul confessed that he loves Victoria more than anything else. The two shed tears as Paul reminded the lady that he's still married to Betty, and it's not right to be romantically involved with her. Paul left the room. Victoria was in grief. She cried all night on her bed. She also fell in love with Paul but couldn't force him with her since he's married. The next day, Paul sits in the living area with his head aching, thinking about what happened last night. He was so confused about what to do. Alberto came in to look for his hat and got irritated by his son, Pedro, who kept insisting that their family's grape plantation should be modernized and be involved in partnerships with large companies. Paul stood up and greeted him. Alberto was still irritated and told Pedro that once they had business partners, they would also get in trouble. Paul interrupted and told Alberto that he could just borrow from the bank if an unexpected problem arose. Alberto looked sharp at Paul. He scolded him by telling him that he had no right to instruct him on what to do on their vineyard business just because he was part of harvesting it. Victoria's dad told Paul that it's better to get his nose out of their business. Alberto turned red and went even angrier as he remembered when he saw Paul sleeping on the floor and on the couch at night. Alberto suspects that he's not really into her daughter Victoria because of that. Victoria passed by and saw his dad arguing with Paul. Paul never talked back nor answered Alberto. With that, Victoria told her dad that he keeps giving meaning to anything just to throw hate at Paul. Alberto responded that he was not convinced that his daughter suddenly married a stranger, but still brought all her things back to the mansion as if she had no one to stay with. Victoria got tired of her father's arguments. She told him if he'd like her to stay, or leave Napa Valley. Alberto responded that all he wants is the truth. Alberto is known not to listen to anyone. The truth that he knows is the truth that he wants to believe. Victoria walked away. Paul breaks the ice by telling Alberto the truth about Victoria going home because she loves her family. Alberto went near him and stared with disgust as he repeatedly told the man to stop getting involved in their business. Paul replied that Victoria is his business. He cares so much about her situation. Paul leaves the mansion because Alberto could not accept him into the family. Paul noticed his coat was missing. The coat where he placed the keys to his room and the locket with Betty's picture. Paul headed to the laundry area to look for it. There, Paul saw that a maid was about to wash it. Paul went in to get it, but the old woman insisted on washing it because it was smelly. The maid placed the coat in the barrel full of water, too late before Paul could grab it. Kind Paul didn't go angry and remained calm as usual. The laundry area has open walls, and Paul can see everyone outside. He saw Victoria, very busy in the front yard. A little while, Paul found her holding her tummy. It was aching badly that Victoria hardly breathed. Paul rushed to rescue her. He offered to carry Victoria inside, but the lady hesitated because Paul was too kind to her and the whole family. Paul is also overstaying at the mansion, which is very different from what they originally planned. Paul suffered so much just to cover her unexpected pregnancy. Paul insisted, but Victoria got irritated with his kindness. Even if she has already fallen in love with him, Victoria wants him to continue his life without her. Victoria walked away, but Paul followed her. At the winery, Paul tried searching for Victoria. Alberto was staring at him as he stood on the platform above. Alberto yelled at Paul and told the man that he would not inherit the vineyard just because he married his daughter. This time, Paul talked back and asked Alberto why he kept shutting his daughter out of his life. Paul continued and shared how amazing Victoria is. He also added how Victoria is loving, the love that he has been dreaming of all of his life to feel. Alberto was left in silence as Paul questioned his love for his daughter, when she was so lovable and easy to love. Alberto became teary but remained angry with Paul for not thinking he was weak. He told Paul he had no right to say that because he doesn't know his daughter. Out of Paul's knowledge, Victoria was just hiding behind the barrels of wine. She was so flattered by the kind words that Paul said. She feels appreciated for the first time. Her dad never let her feel that. Alberto continued to argue with Paul. He told Paul that his love for his daughter could be seen in all the efforts and hard work he pours into the farm's success. He offers all of his property and assets to them, Victoria, and the whole family. Alberto loves his family and does everything for them. However, he fails to tell that love to them. Alberto is not a showy dad who fully expresses himself to his family. At the laundry area, Paul went in. He grabbed his wet coat and placed it inside his bag. He desperately wants not to get involved anymore with the Aragon family. As he was heading out of the mansion, Don Pedro called him. The old man offered him a special brandy he had made 21 years ago. Paul was so respectful to the man that he smiled back and never hesitated to go near him. He also accepted his offer to come inside and drink with him. Meanwhile, in the laundry area, Victoria was with other maids sewing a cloth. She tried to be composed and look happy in front of them. However, when the maids asked her about Paul, Victoria shed tears. She continued crying and walked away. At the winery's table, Don Pedro and Paul sat. The old man already knew that the couple had a problem. He tried to give advice, but Paul asked permission to leave because he was anticipating that a bus would pass by the valley. Don Pedro didn't allow him to go. Instead, he requested the man to stay one more day, to witness the blessing of the wine at the festival the next day. Paul could not decline the old man's request because he was very kind to him the first time they met. It was already dark in the Napa Valley, but the two were still drinking. They are also with the musicians playing a romantic song as background. Don Pedro sang a song for courtship and taught Paul its lyrics. Even if he sang off-key, Paul continued and was already drunk that evening. After they rehearsed the romantic song, Don Pedro, Paul, and the musicians headed to the mansion in front of the balcony of Victoria's room. Don Pedro positioned himself, ready to coach them in singing. He signaled for the men to start. Romantic music plays that woke up everyone in the mansion, including Victoria. Victoria looked out of the window and saw Paul. Victoria smiled and just stood in her dark room. Meanwhile, Paul sang with all his heart and stared at the window. Don Pedro, on the other hand, enjoyed watching the traditional way of courting a lady, where a man sings in front of the girl's window at night. However, Paul does not intend to court Victoria but to apologize and get her back. Paul was waiting for Victoria to turn on the lights. According to Don Pedro, once the lights are turned on, the lady accepts his apologies. The song is about to end, but Victoria's room is still dark. Paul stopped singing and felt nervous. He was torn between pursuing Victoria or disappearing from her life because he was already married. Paul finally decides he will leave Victoria and Napa Valley for good. While walking away in the vineyard, Paul still hears the music playing. It stopped, and he saw Victoria's room lights turned on after the romantic song. Paul was teary-eyed but continued to walk away. The next day, the festive blessing of the wine started. Paul attended the ceremony dressed as a soldier in the event. The crowd cheered as Victoria entered riding a horse. She was so beautiful in her white dress and hat. However, something seems missing on her face, a smile. Victoria looked lonely, and so is Paul. The Aragon family is all present at the celebration. Paul continues to stare at Victoria. Victoria, on the other hand, noticed Paul but she didn't smile at him. Father Cottery led the ceremony with a prayer and blessed the wine harvested at Aragon's vineyard. Victoria looked at the balcony where Paul stood, but the lady couldn't find him. Meanwhile, Paul looked at the event for the last time and left. Suddenly, Victoria called him. She was carrying 2 glasses of wine and approached him. Victoria toasted a wine and told Paul they were celebrating their what-ifs. Paul, with sad eyes, tried to be happy while looking at Victoria. A little later, Alberto came closer to them with Father Cottery. Alberto introduced Paul as his son-in-law to the priest. Victoria and Paul were shocked. Alberto continued praising Paul as a brave soldier who also helped them harvest the vineyard. Victoria tried to stop her father. Victoria already accepted that she couldn't be with Paul anymore. Alberto didn't listen and even announced at the event that he was inviting all of them to attend his daughter's wedding later at night. Alberto is officially giving his daughter's hand to Paul. The crowd celebrated after the announcement. Paul, on the other hand, told Victoria that they should tell everyone the truth. Victoria agreed and promised that she would be the one to reveal everything. Victoria is not afraid of her father anymore. Paul felt proud and gave Victoria a medal as a present to her incoming baby. Victoria thanked Paul for being the most honorable man she had met all her life. The two shared a kiss before Victoria went back to her family. Victoria finally shares with her father that she is pregnant without a husband. Grandparents hugged Victoria tightly while Alberto walked out and was angry with his daughter. Paul was just watching them and left after. Paul could not catch the bus, so he walked in, returning to Florida. Fortunately, a vehicle stopped him and offered a ride to San Rafael. Paul hopped in. The driver talked to Paul, who looked confused and stared blankly. He asked the soldier what he was doing there nearby. Subconsciously, Paul uttered that he was walking in the clouds. The driver laughed and just threw a joke at Paul. Meanwhile, at Napa Valley, Alberto was having a drink with his men, still upset with his daughter. Victoria, on the other hand, strolled to the vineyard, thinking of everything she went through with Paul. In the car, Paul was having a nightmare again. He was dreaming of war again. He opened a door where a kid was awaiting him. Paul also saw Victoria in a white dress. The three held hands like a family and happily walked in the clouds before them. Suddenly, a blast occurred that awakened Paul from his dream. It was already dark, and he was still riding in the vehicle. The next day, Paul finally arrived in Florida. He went inside his apartment and caught Betty sleeping with another man. Paul remained calm as usual. He came back and chose his wife, but she betrayed him. Betty apologized and told Paul that her life would just be miserable if they continued their relationship. They have opposite personalities and goals in life. Betty handed the annulment that she had already filed and was waiting for Paul to sign it. While leaving Florida, Paul realizes something. He can now pursue Victoria because he's already annulled. On the same day, Paul hitched onto different cars just to reach Napa Valley. He also walked miles at times when no car passed the road. Paul finally reached Napa Valley. He saw Mr. Aragon, all drunk and sleeping at the table. Paul apologized to him and asked his permission to marry his daughter. He also promised to stand as a father to Victoria's child. Alberto got mad and shouted that he was already married to someone. Paul immediately showed him the annulment papers, but Mr. Aragon threw them away. He requested his men to get a gun, because he's planning to shoot Paul for the heartache he caused his daughter. Paul, on the other hand, kept saying his pure intention for Victoria. Alberto didn't listen and was so mad at Paul for fooling him. Paul screamed Victoria's name since her father won't listen to his explanation. Victoria woke up and recognized Paul's voice. She hurriedly ran downstairs. The commotion continues, and everyone on the farm wakes up from sleep. Alberto throws everything he sees in Paul's direction. This includes the lamp that was only the last object at the table. Mr. Aragon threw it with all his might to Paul. However, the lamp went into the vineyards and created fire. Mr. Aragon was sober as he saw his treasured fruits burning. Paul immediately went into the barrel full of water and dipped his clothes. He tried to stop the fire using it. Meanwhile, Victoria held her father's hand to help him stand up. Victoria also helped Paul in putting out the fire. The fire started to spread to more vines. The Aragon family couldn't just stare at it, so they also helped. Farmers who were also part of the grape plantation's success for centuries tried to stop the fire. The wind blows, spreading the fire faster. It was uncontrollable anymore. All of them went away from the vines to protect themselves from burning. The fire was so massive that Pedro, Victoria's brother, was trapped. He was forced to jump across the fire to escape. There, Pedro's clothes got burned. Aragon family, already standing in a safe place, screamed as they saw fire around Pedro's body. Paul came to rescue him with a wet cloth he had brought. Paul covered Pedro with damp clothes and successfully saved him from burning. Everyone surrendered and felt hopeless to stop the fire except Alberto. He ran to the vines crying to save his plant from burning. Don Pedro embraced him and forced him to get away from the fire. Aragon's family cried, and the other farmers of the vineyard, as they watched the vast field of grapes being burned. It hurts them so much to see the vineyard they have taken care of for centuries go to ashes in just a minute. The next day, the beautiful green fields of Napa Valley turned black. Victoria saw her father in grief after the incident. Victoria approached him. Mr. Aragon's heart became soft as he saw his daughter teary-eyed and comforting him. At that moment, he confessed that he was afraid of losing Victoria and everyone he loved. He may not be expressive to tell his family how much he loves them, but he does. He doesn't know another way to express his love besides providing them with all they need. Mr. Aragon cried like a baby while apologizing to his daughter. Don Pedro, on the other hand, feels depressed knowing that the root of the first vines from his ancestors was also burned. They have no more vines to replant again. He shed tears as he told Paul that Los Noobs was finished. Paul pitied the family. They have lost everything they owned and have only themselves left. Paul decides to walk in the clouds to the hill where the root of life is planted. He remained hopeful that the first vine was still alive. Paul finally arrives on the hilltop, where the vine is located. The vine of life was also burned. Regardless, Paul dug it up and carefully brought it to Mr. Aragon. Everyone looked hopeless as they saw the healthy vine turn black after the fire. However, Paul remained hopeful and requested Mr. Aragon to look at the vine's interior if it were also burned. Victoria's father grabbed his knife. He was trembling as he slowly scraped the vine's skin. Its inside is still alive. Mr. Aragon happily screamed as he saw the interior of the vine still green. Everyone clapped and was in tears after hearing it. Don Pedro shouted that Las Nubes was still alive and adored the beautiful moment. Mr. Aragon was so thankful to Paul. Despite how he treated him before, he still respected him. To show his appreciation, Alberto Aragon cut a part of the vine and gave it to Paul. This symbolizes that Paul is officially part of the Aragon family and was entrusted with restoring the vineyard. Mr. Aragon also approves of his marriage to his only daughter, Victoria. Before planting the vine, Paul held Victoria's hand and gave her a ring. Everyone was so supportive of the couple. Paul and Victoria kissed in front of them. Everyone clapped and witnessed the romantic moment. Orphan Paul finally found the love he had been searching for a long time, the love of a family. He may have met them late in his life, but Paul promises to walk with them in the clouds of the Napa Valley as he leads the restoration of the vineyard that thrived for centuries.